What happens when royalty meets reality television and refuses to play by the rules? In just 38 seconds, one of the most famous faces in the world would go from composed guest to completely unhinged, launching an attack so vicious that it would force a host to do something unthinkable: throw a prince off his own show. This is the story of how Prince Harry walked onto Greg Gutfeld's set with an agenda and how it all came crashing down in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The stage was set for what should have been a straightforward interview. Greg Gutfeld, known for his sharp wit and no-nonsense approach, had invited Prince Harry onto his show to discuss his recent ventures and life in America. The audience was packed, the cameras were rolling, and everyone expected a lively but respectful conversation. What they got instead was something nobody saw coming. From the moment Prince Harry walked onto that stage, something felt different. The usual warm greeting, the handshake, the smile for the cameras, it was all there, but there was an edge to it, and tension that hung in the air like static electricity before a storm. Greg opened with what seemed like a friendly question. "So, Harry, you've been in America for a while now. How are you finding life outside the royal bubble?" It was a softball, an easy question designed to get the conversation flowing, but Harry's response wasn't what anyone expected. "Well, Greg, I'd say I'm finding it refreshing to be around people who actually work for a living instead of just talking into a camera." The audience went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Greg's smile didn't falter, but you could see something shift in his eyes. He'd been in this business long enough to know when someone was trying to provoke him. "That's interesting," Greg replied, keeping his composure. "Because from where I'm sitting, talking into a camera has given me the opportunity to build something real, to connect with millions of people, and to do it without a trust fund backing me up." The audience erupted, not in applause, but in that collective gasp that happens when you know something big is about to go down. Harry's face flushed. His jaw tightened. The prince was not used to being challenged, especially not on live television. "Trust fund?" Harry shot back, leaning forward in his chair. "You want to talk about trust funds? At least my family built something that lasted centuries. What have you built, Greg? A career out of making jokes about people who actually matter?" Greg didn't miss a beat. "People who actually matter? Harry, I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, and everyday Americans who've overcome incredible odds. They didn't need a crown to matter. They earned their place through hard work and dedication." The tension in the studio was suffocating now. The producers were probably losing their minds in the control room, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue. They chose to keep rolling, and thank goodness they did, because what happened next was television gold. Harry stood up from his chair, not to leave, but to tower over Greg, using his physical presence to try and intimidate. "You know what your problem is, Greg? You're just another American who thinks he can say whatever he wants without consequences. You hide behind your little jokes and your audience, but you're nothing more than a coward with a microphone." The audience was in shock. Some people were on their feet. Others had their hands over their mouths. This was a prince, a member of one of the most famous families in the world, completely losing control on live television. Greg remained seated, calm, collected. He looked up at Harry with an expression that was almost pitying. "Harry, I think you should sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself?" Harry's voice was getting louder now, more shrill. "I'm embarrassing myself? You're the one who makes a mockery of serious issues night after night. You turn everything into a punchline. You have no respect for anyone or anything." "I have respect for people who earn it," Greg replied, his voice steady. "And right now, you're not doing a very good job of that. I invited you here for a conversation, not a tantrum." That word, tantrum, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Harry's face went from flushed to bright red. His hands were balled into fists at his sides. "Tantrum?" Harry practically spat the word. "You wouldn't know real pressure if it hit you in the face. You sit here in your comfortable studio with your adoring fans, and you judge people like me who've actually lived through real scrutiny, real pressure. You're a joke, Greg. Your show is a joke. This whole thing is beneath me." The audience had turned now. You could feel it in the room. Whatever sympathy people might have had for Harry, whatever curiosity brought them there, it was evaporating with every word out of his mouth. They were seeing someone who'd been given every privilege in life, acting like the world owed him something more. Greg stood up now, slowly, deliberately. He wasn't trying to match Harry's aggression. He was asserting his authority, his space, his show. "You know what, Harry? You're right about one thing. This is beneath you." In fact, I think this entire experience is beneath you. So let me make this easy for everyone involved. Greg turned to face the audience, then back to Harry. I've had politicians on this show who disagreed with me. I've had activists, celebrities, athletes, all kinds of people with all kinds of views. And you know what? We've had heated debates. We've gone back and forth. But there's one thing everyone understood. You can disagree without being disrespectful. You can make your point without making it personal. Harry opened his mouth to respond, but Greg held up his hand. I'm not finished. You came on my show, and I welcomed you. I asked you fair questions. And instead of having a conversation, you've spent the last several minutes insulting me, insulting my work, insulting my audience. You've acted like everyone here is lucky to be in your presence. Well, I've got news for you, Your Highness. You're a guest here. This is my house. And in my house, we treat people with respect. The audience started clapping, slowly at first, then building into a roar of applause. Harry looked around, seeming shocked that the room had turned against him. Oh, so now you're turning the audience against me? Harry said, his voice dripping with contempt. Very clever, Greg. Very manipulative. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You media people, you're all the same. You twist everything to make yourselves look good. I don't need to twist anything, Greg said calmly. Everyone here has eyes and ears. They can see exactly what's happening. They can see who came here looking for a fight and who tried to have a civil conversation. Harry took a step closer to Greg, pointing his finger directly at the host's face. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've been through, what my family has been through. You sit here in your bubble making your little jokes, and you think you understand the world, but you don't. You understand nothing. Then help me understand, Greg said, spreading his hands. That's what I invited you here to do. Have a conversation. Share your perspective. But instead, you're having a meltdown because someone had the audacity to push back on you. Is that what you're used to, Harry? Everyone just nodding along? Everyone just agreeing with whatever you say because of who you are? The color drained from Harry's face, then came rushing back even redder than before. How dare you? How dare you speak to me like that? Do you know who I am? And there it was, the 4 words that sealed Harry's fate. Do you know who I am? The ultimate entitled statement. The thing people say when they've run out of arguments and have nothing left but their status. Greg's expression changed. The patience, the willingness to engage, it all disappeared in an instant. His face became stern, serious. Yeah, Harry, I know exactly who you are. You're a guy who was born into privilege and has spent years complaining about it. You're someone who had every opportunity in the world and decided to spend your time telling everyone how hard your life has been. And right now, you're a guest on my show who has completely worn out his welcome. The studio was dead silent. Everyone knew what was coming next. I think it's time for you to leave, Greg said, his voice firm and unwavering. Harry laughed, but it was a bitter, angry sound. Oh, you're kicking me out? You're actually kicking me out? Do you have any idea what kind of mistake you're making? The only mistake I made was thinking you could handle a real conversation, Greg shot back. Security, can we please escort our guest out? That's when Harry really lost it. Security? You're calling security on me? This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. You Americans, you have no class, no respect, no understanding of anything beyond your own little world. 2 security guards appeared from the wings, walking calmly but purposefully toward the interview area. Harry saw them coming and his whole demeanor changed. The anger shifted to something else, something almost panicked. You can't do this, Harry said, his voice rising. You can't just throw me off your show. You're leaving, Greg said simply. One way or another, you're leaving my show. You can walk out with some dignity, or security can help you. Your choice. The audience was on the edge of their seats. Cameras were capturing every second. This was the moment everyone would be talking about for weeks, months, maybe years. Harry looked around wildly, as if searching for allies, for someone to back him up. But the audience was silent. His own behavior had isolated him completely. He was alone on that stage, facing the consequences of his own actions. This is ridiculous, Harry muttered, but the fight had gone out of his voice. This whole thing is ridiculous. Maybe it is, Greg agreed. But it's over. Goodbye, Harry. The security guards reached Harry's position. They didn't grab him, didn't touch him. They just stood there, making their presence known, making it clear that this was really happening. Harry had to make a choice. For a moment, it looked like he might escalate further. His fists clenched again, his jaw set, but then something shifted. Maybe he realized how bad this looked. Maybe he realized he'd already gone too far. Maybe he just didn't want to be physically escorted out on live television. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin in that practiced royal way, and turned toward the exit. But he couldn't help himself. He had to get the last word. "You'll regret this, Greg," Harry said over his shoulder. "You and your pathetic little show. You'll regret this." Greg didn't respond. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching Harry walk off his stage. The security guards followed at a respectful distance, making sure the prince actually left the building. The studio remained silent for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then Greg turned to face the audience directly. "Well," he said, and you could hear the exhaustion in his voice, mixed with something else. Relief, maybe, or vindication. That was something. The audience erupted. Not just applause, but cheers, whoops, people on their feet giving Greg a standing ovation. They'd just witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be replayed and discussed and analyzed for a long time to come. Greg raised his hand to quiet them down. "Look, I don't take pleasure in what just happened. I really don't. I invited Harry here, hoping we could have a real conversation. I wanted to give him a platform to share his perspective, to connect with an American audience in a genuine way." He paused, shaking his head. "But you can't have a conversation with someone who only wants to lecture you. You can't have a dialogue with someone who thinks disagreement is disrespect. And you absolutely cannot have a productive exchange with someone who pulls out the 'do you know who I am' card." The audience applauded again. They understood. They'd seen it all unfold in real time. "I've been doing this job for a long time," Greg continued. "I've interviewed people from all walks of life. Rich, poor, famous, unknown. And you know what I've learned? The people who are most secure in themselves, who are truly confident, they never need to remind you of their status. They never need to tell you how important they are. They just are." More applause. Greg was in his element now, turning a disaster into a teaching moment, using Harry's meltdown to make a larger point about character and respect. "Harry came on the show with a chip on his shoulder," Greg said. "He was looking for a fight from the moment he sat down. And when he didn't get the softball treatment he apparently expected, when someone actually challenged him, he couldn't handle it. He resorted to insults, to intimidation, to pulling rank. And that tells you everything you need to know." The cameras were still rolling, capturing every word. This wasn't just good television anymore. This was a cultural moment, a line in the sand about how we treat each other, about what behavior is acceptable and what isn't. "I want to be clear about something," Greg said, his tone becoming more serious. "I don't think less of Harry because he's a prince. I don't think more of him because he's a prince. I judge people by their actions, by how they treat others, by whether they can engage in good faith. And tonight, Harry failed that test." The audience was hanging on every word. This was why they watched Greg Gutfeld, not for the easy laughs or the predictable takes, but for moments like this. Moments of real clarity, real honesty. We live in a world where people think their status, their background, their identity gives them a pass on basic decency, Greg continued. But it doesn't. Being a prince doesn't mean you get to insult people without consequences. Having a famous last name doesn't mean you're above criticism. And throwing a tantrum when someone disagrees with you doesn't make you right. It just makes you look childish. The applause built again, but Greg kept going. He was on a roll now, and everyone in that studio knew they were witnessing something special. "You know what the saddest part is?" Greg asked. "Harry had a chance here tonight to show a different side of himself, to have a real conversation about real issues, to connect with people who might not agree with him but were willing to listen. Instead, he chose to be defensive, aggressive, and ultimately disrespectful. He wasted an opportunity." Someone in the audience yelled out, "You gave him a fair shot," and others echoed the sentiment. Greg nodded in acknowledgement. "I did. I absolutely did. And I think everyone here can attest to that. I asked fair questions. I was willing to hear him out. But respect is a two-way street. You can't demand it without giving it." And Harry forgot that lesson somewhere along the way. Greg walked back to his desk, leaning against it casually. The tension was finally breaking. The storm had passed. What remained was the aftermath, the processing of what everyone had just witnessed. "Look, I hope Harry takes some time to reflect on what happened here tonight," Greg said, and he actually sounded sincere. I hope he realizes that burning bridges and making enemies isn't a strategy for happiness or success. I hope he figures out that the world doesn't owe him anything just because of his bloodline. The audience was quieter now, listening intently. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was about something bigger. But whether he does or not, that's on him, Greg concluded. All I can do is maintain the standards of this show, treat people fairly, and expect the same in return. And when someone violates those standards as egregiously as Harry did tonight, well, you saw what happens. The door is over there, and don't let it hit you on the way out. The final applause was thunderous. The audience knew they'd been part of something historic. They'd watched a host stand his ground against royalty, refuse to be intimidated, and ultimately do what needed to be done to maintain the integrity of his show. Greg let them applaud for a moment, then raised his hand for quiet one last time. We've got a great show planned for the rest of the hour. Let's not let one entitled guest ruin the whole evening. We've got real people with real stories coming up, folks who understand that respect is earned, not demanded. Stick around. And with that, the show cut to commercial. Behind the scenes, the producers were probably scrambling, trying to figure out how to handle the fallout. The social media team was likely watching their feeds explode. The legal department was probably drafting statements. But on that stage, in that moment, Greg Gutfeld had done something remarkable. He'd stood up to a prince. He'd refused to be bullied or intimidated. He'd maintained his dignity and his principles in the face of someone who thought their status made them untouchable. The whole exchange, from the first passive-aggressive comment to Harry's final exit, had taken less than 15 minutes. But in those 15 minutes, something important had happened. A line had been drawn, a standard had been set, and millions of people watching at home had witnessed what happens when entitlement meets accountability. Harry had walked onto that stage thinking he could control the narrative, that his status would shield him from real scrutiny, that he could say whatever he wanted without pushback. He'd been wrong on all counts, and his dramatic exit, forced by his own behavior, would become the defining image of his time in America for many people. Greg, on the other hand, had shown exactly why he'd built such a loyal following. He didn't back down. He didn't apologize for asking tough questions. He didn't let someone's status intimidate him into submission. He'd been fair, he'd been firm, and when push came to shove, he'd done what needed to be done. The audience that night left the studio buzzing with energy. They'd come expecting a typical talk show interview. They'd gotten a masterclass in standing your ground, in maintaining your principles, in refusing to let anyone, not even royalty, treat you with disrespect. And as the rest of the show continued, as Greg interviewed his other guests with his trademark wit and insight, there was an undercurrent of electricity in the air. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew they'd witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. In those 38 seconds, when it all started to unravel, when Harry's first cutting comment set the stage for his ultimate downfall, nobody could have predicted it would escalate so dramatically. But looking back, maybe it was inevitable. Maybe when you combine entitlement with a platform, when you mix privilege with public scrutiny, when someone who's used to deference meets someone who demands mutual respect, something has to give. That night, what gave was Harry's composure, his dignity, and ultimately, his welcome on the show. And while Greg Gutfeld never set out to kick a prince off his stage, when the moment came, he didn't hesitate. He did what any good host would do. He protected his show, his audience, and his integrity. The lesson was clear, and it echoed long after the cameras stopped rolling. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what title you hold. If you can't treat people with basic respect, if you can't handle disagreement without resorting to insults and intimidation, if you think your status puts you above accountability, then you're going to face consequences. Harry learned that lesson the hard way that night. And America learned something too, that even in a world obsessed with celebrity and status, there are still people willing to stand up and say, "Not on my watch." Greg Gutfeld was one of those people, and his audience loved him for it.